Well, Happy New Year, everyone. I sure loved December's GAC meeting. I hope that's an annual tradition for us. Carmen Goers, thank you for helping with that as well. It was great to have Sean Bunny facilitating, Senator Gildon, Representative Robertson, Senator Fortunato, Representative Erickson, and Councilmember Zeiger were all present with questions and updates, and Executive Bruce Stanmeyer was in the audience, which was fantastic. So just thank you, Bill Corums, Pueblo Nissan, for hosting us. That was just a fantastic event. And then, of course, culminating with our Mingle Jingle elected officials, public and elected officials holiday reception was a blast as well at Santa Land at the Old Camry. So for those who missed out on either one of those, mark your calendars next year, typically kind of around that December 7th, 8th, 9th time frame. But again, just a worthwhile way to end the year for sure. Well, again, Happy New Year. I think we're starting it off on just the right note, bringing in our partners from the Association of Washington Business, the AWB. They stay so closely to advocacy. They're definitely an agency that we lean on heavily for the latest updates on advocacy. So today we have with us their Director of Government Affairs, Mike Ennis. I believe he joined us last year as well, just to provide a little preview update on advocacy and a preview of the upcoming legislative session. So honored to have you here, Mike. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Tara. And I appreciate the relationship that we've had with the chamber. We rely on our chambers quite a bit throughout session to get an understanding of how issues are affecting different areas in the state. So we appreciate the business relationship that we have with the chambers around Washington. So I was asked to give a quick preview, sort of a high-level overview of what we expect to see during session this year. I see some folks on the line who are in Olympia just as much as I am. And if you have something you want to add, please feel free to do so. I certainly don't know it all. And some of you may be closer to some of these issues than I am. I thought what I would do is talk a little bit about what issues I think are going to color the legislative session, and then move into some of the politics, sort of the indirect influences that are going to affect session after we talk about the issues, because there are quite a few. A lot has happened since session ended last year. A lot of developments have taken place, and I think it's an important conversation to have beyond just the issues that we expect to see. So some of these I know you've probably have heard of before. The long-term care tax and policy has now taken effect. That is probably going to be the top issue we have to work on when session starts next week. The business community is in a very difficult position with this issue. The statute has taken effect, and businesses are required to collect the long-term care tax from their employees. But you have the governor's office who has stated that his agencies are not going to enforce the law, and he expects the legislature to make some changes to it before enforcement takes place. Well, as you can imagine, that puts businesses, especially legitimate businesses, as we want to do the right thing, right? So you have the governor and state agencies saying they're not enforcing it. You don't have to collect, but the law tells you have to collect. So I think what most businesses are probably going to end up doing is collecting and then holding that tax, those proceeds, until the legislature acts or doesn't act, or till a new rule is written, or whatever changes during session. I don't think most businesses are going to rely on a promise that the legislature is going to do something to fix this issue. But nevertheless, we've been busy the last couple of weeks trying to educate our membership on this issue. If you have questions about it, please feel free to reach out to my colleagues, Amy Anderson or Bob Battles. They both work on the long-term care issue for the association, and they'd be able to answer any of the questions that you might have on that one. But we do expect legislators to take up that issue early on in session. we'll see how that develops. The other issue that I think is going to influence session are police reforms. The legislature made a number of changes to some of the rules and policies around how police officers can interact with the public. A lot of those have been controversial. A lot of them have news stories written about them and some of the problems that have been identified. And I think you're going to see some efforts this session to fix some of those issues that were created with last year's changes. I think you'll also see an effort from some in the legislature who want to go even further with some of the police reforms that were made last session. We've already seen some pre-filed bills. Some of them have made the news, so you may have seen articles about them, who want to take those reforms even further and further restrict law enforcement and sort of redefine some of the laws that are out there currently. So we'll be watching that one closely. I think that's going to influence session as well. Another big one is natural gas. We've seen some legislation last year. We've seen some early bills this year that will ban the use of natural gas in Washington state. That will be a big issue for the business community. My colleague, Peter Godlewski, handles that for our association, and his environment committee meets regularly with the legislature on handling that issue. So if you've got questions about the banning of natural gas, feel free to reach out to him. And then finally, transportation. I think I'm going to spend the most time on this issue. This is my number one issue, but it's going to be a big topic going into session this year. Most of the conversation around transportation during interim was whether we were going to have a special session to pass a transportation package. Of course, that never materialized. The legislature did not come to an agreement. So we did not obviously go into a special session, and there was not a revenue package. The federal government, however, did pass their version of an infrastructure package, and Washington is expected to get I haven't seen a firm number, but multiple billions of dollars to fund infrastructure over the next several months and years. So that's good news. AWB has generally supported infrastructure packages in the past. This last summer, we did a listening tour. We went around the state trying to gauge where our membership was at, where the business community was at on a future package. The low carbon fuel standard and the cap and trade issues both passed last session. And I think there's a lot of hesitancy from the business community looking forward, a lot of uncertainty still on whether an infrastructure package is right at this time or not. We still feel there's a need for additional revenue for infrastructure, and the legislature, I think, is going to continue working on that. So we'll be at the table trying to make sure that the important infrastructure is funded. We did have a change in leadership regarding transportation. Senator Hobbs, of course, was appointed Secretary of State. So he's left the legislature, and he's no longer chair of the Senate Transportation Committee. Senator Marco Lias was appointed by his caucus to chair the committee. Many of you probably know Senator Lias. I've known him for quite some time. He was the majority floor leader in the Senate, used to be on transportation. So he does have a transportation background, which I think is great news. And he gets along pretty well with the governor's office and Representative Fye in the House. He is, in most conversations I think people have had with him, he's very bullish on a transportation package, which I think is good news. Again, we like infrastructure. So I think you're going to hear a lot of conversations about a transportation package this session. Ultimately, I think it's unlikely that the legislature passes what I would call a traditional infrastructure package. I think what the legislature may do instead, and this is important enough to pay attention to, even if they don't do a traditional package, is this idea of using general fund or operating dollars to fund infrastructure. There's been a lot of discussion about that in the interim and now coming into session, not only from those who follow transportation, because we've always argued that you should use operating dollars for infrastructure, but also from some in leadership, The transportation chairs have talked about it. Representative Fye attended all of our listening session meetings over the summer, and he mentioned a number of times that he was open to the idea of using operating dollars for transportation infrastructure. I've heard some of the budget leaders say they're open to the idea also. That is significant. Regardless of who's been in charge of the legislature in either the House or the Senate, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, there has always been a reluctance, if not outright opposition, to using operating dollars for transportation infrastructure. Doesn't matter if it's Senator Braun who's in charge, or Senator Leas, or Senator Billig. It does not matter. They've always been reluctant to doing that. Now things have changed a little bit, and there has been an openness to using general fund dollars for transportation. That is good news given the significant obligations that the transportation budget has. The culvert ruling obligates the state $3 or $4 billion by 2030. We don't have that money. The COVID response has created a shortfall in a number of connecting Washington projects. So there's a lot of backfill that needs to take place, and just current revenues have fallen as well because of COVID. So those need to be backfilled also. And then, of course, you have a bunch of new infrastructure capital projects that need to be funded that are very much needed in the state that we don't have the money for also. So very significant need for revenues. I've heard, again, Representative Fye, as he went on our listening tour, his justification or his reasoning for using general fund dollars is very interesting to me. It's an argument that we have made before, and others in the business community have made before. So it was welcome to hear him say it, but I'll give you a quick preview because I think you're going to hear a lot about it as session goes on. It's this idea that every time we've passed a transportation package in the past, we create all this new infrastructure, which creates jobs and additional economic development in those regions where the infrastructure is built. All of that activity translates to higher revenue in the general fund. And the transportation budget gets none of that back. So given the additional obligations that the state has in transportation, and the fact that the transportation budget has basically, I don't want to overstate it, but I'll use the word propped up the general fund in some respects, it's time for the general fund to now support infrastructure on the transportation side. That's not me saying that, though I have said that before. That's Representative Fye, chair of the House Transportation Committee, saying that. He said that a number of times in our meetings. He's said it recently also. So it'll be something to follow, something to pay attention to. I think the legislature, while they won't pass a traditional gas tax package, they may make some fund shifts from the general fund to the transportation budget. One in particular I'll mention is the sales tax on vehicles. All of that money goes in the general fund right now, and that's the primary funding source that legislators are looking at to shift money from the operating budget to the transportation budget. So basically, every time you buy a car, you pay sales tax on that. That money would presumably, instead of going to the general fund, would go to the transportation budget and fund projects. I think a lot of the conversation or some of the fights on that issue is going to be about how much money comes out of the operating budget, what does it fund on the transportation side, and whether that funding is, or that shift is temporary or permanent. And then how do you make it permanent if you want it permanent? So those would be some of the more nuanced issues that come up on that issue for transportation going forward. So some of the larger politics that I think are going to color session. The House has recently announced that they're going to move to a full virtual session. That's important because it's a lot harder. A virtual session makes it a lot harder for not only professional lobbyists, but also the public from engaging on issues in Olympia. Again, Representative Fye said a number of times on our listening tour this summer that he believes the cap and trade and low carbon fuel standard bills would not have passed if we had a regular session. He says they only passed because we were in a virtual session. That's very telling if you work on legislation in Olympia of how the virtual session impacts policies. It restricts the ability for not only lobbyists, but the public from engaging on these issues. And the legislature is going to pass legislation that is going to be problematic sometimes. So going to a full virtual session, I think, is going to have some consequences that we're going to need to deal with. The Senate has not followed suit yet. They are still sort of in this hybrid mode. It wouldn't surprise me if they follow the House and move to full virtual session. But I don't, at least as of this morning, I haven't seen an announcement yet that they're following and moving to full virtual.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
The Facilities and Operations Committee is meeting today to decide that.
Okay, there you go. So, and yeah, so like I said, it wouldn't surprise me if the Senate did move to full virtual also. So we'll keep an eye on that. Thank you. Another issue, so I mentioned Hobbs. This is an election year. It's a short session year, 60 days. In the last decade, I don't think we've gone into special session in the short years. We may have, but for the most part, we don't do special sessions in the short years because it's an election year. Legislators have an incentive to get out on time. I don't think that'll be different this time. What is different is Senator Hobbs moving out of the Senate. So you had this moderate wing in the Senate, who the 5 or 6 senators who were sort of in this little moderate, they were more moderate in their views, and they were able to control some of the legislation that passed or didn't pass in Olympia. Well, that group is now down 1 because Hobbs has moved on. Not only are they down 1, but they are also down a significant member of their group, if not their leader of that group. So the progressive wing in the Senate can basically do whatever they want without Senator Hobbs there. So before Hobbs left, I would have said this session was going to be a sleepy 60-day session and not a lot would happen. Now with Senator Hobbs moved on, it's now a question mark for me. I don't know if it's going to be a sleepy session or if it's going to be a challenging session. The leadership and the progressive wings of both the House and the Senate have shown really they've given no indication that they are worried about the effect of some of these policies. And I'll point to long-term care and the police reforms as prime examples of that. They're not paying a lot of attention to the consequences and are just passing legislation because it's on their agenda. It's hard for me to know whether that sort of philosophy has changed given the fact that it's an election year. I think it's possible we could be in for a very challenging session given the change in the makeup of the Senate because of that. And then, of course, you have tax increases. The legislature over the last 3 sessions has passed 22 tax increases, raising $40 billion over the next 10 years. That's having that's given the overlay or the shadow of COVID on the business community. There's, like I said, a lot of uncertainty looking forward into the future from the business community because of COVID and also because of these tax increases. The low carbon fuel standard and cap and trade alone are going to raise fuel prices by over $1 a gallon by 2028. So I think the business community is trying to understand what the full impact is going to be looking forward, and having all the tax increases applied to them over the last 3 sessions is causing further hesitancy. So all of those issues, I think, are going to come into play this session. And like I said, what I thought was going to be a sleepy session may not be. It still could be, but it may not be. It has the potential to be a challenging session for the business community because of the changes that have taken place. So maybe I'll stop there and stop rambling and see if there are any questions.
guess I'll direct the crowd if there are any questions.
Mike, this is Sean. Hey, Mike, this is Sean. I've got a question. On transportation, if you were, I know it's a big unresolved question about sort of how much, how large, how permanent of an operating budget shift there might be, but I'm going to ask you to hazard a wild guess, maybe to draw a bit of a comparison to other packages that we have seen in the past, just to give us maybe a bit of a, to use the Olympic cliche, size of the box comparison. Just if you were to, we're not holding you to it, but if you were to make a wild guess, sort of how big do you think something like that might end up being?
Sure. And it's sort of all over the map here in the beginning of session. So Representative Barkas has a proposal. He's deliberately not wanting to call it a package, but his includes a lot of fund shifts from the general fund to transportation, and then vice versa from the transportation budget back to the general fund. His proposal, if you implemented it in full, would raise about $20 billion over 10 years with no tax increase. So that's just strictly looking at fund shifts. I've heard that Senator Wolfus, the budget chair in the Senate, has been open to the idea of allowing the sales tax on cars a 30% shift. So taking 30% of those dollars from the general fund to transportation. I don't know what the dollar amount is for the 30%. If I'm going to guess, it's probably $1 billion, $2 billion. I think that the full amount was $4 or $5 billion over 10 years, maybe it was 16 years, something like that. Senator King has wanted something higher than 30%. I think he's advocating for something around 50%. And then, of course, Representative Barkas wants 100% of that shift to occur. Senator Leas, again, is very gung-ho on a package. He's talking about, again, the size of that box being somewhere between $7-8 billion ish. There's a lot of federal money that's out there. Some of that federal money is available and has not been allocated. That's $1 or $2 billion. You got the new federal dollars that are coming in. That it's hard to put a number to that amount. I've heard anywhere between 7 and 8 billion. And then, of course, you have the cap and trade dollars, which have not started coming in yet, but the ecology is starting the rulemaking process. Those dollars dedicate about 5 to 6 billion to transportation over the next 10, 15 years. Those need to be allocated also. So those are existing, I'll put a quote around existing. Those are existing dollars that need to be allocated as well. So it's kind of hard to decide or to define how big that box is. I kind of want to say just generally, it's probably going to be somewhere in the same size of the traditional packages that we've seen before. Looks like there's other questions. Did we lose Tara? Maybe Kelly, Representative Chambers, you want to go?
She put her question in the chat, which was regarding the QTAM bill.
Oh, gotcha. So QTAM, my colleague, Bob Battles, he does employment law for the association. He handles that issue. I think QTAM has been an issue that we have worked on the last couple of years and will continue to work on. It's very challenging for the business community. Bob is the one that's handling that effort for the business community, and I would encourage you to reach out to him.
And then my question, this is Carmen from Heritage Bank. You mentioned the 22 tax increases in the past 3 sessions. And it's my understanding that the revenue is exceeding projections. Can you give some numbers to that?
Ooh, someone else might know the number to the revenue forecast on how much more surplus the state has. I don't know that number.
It's right around the $8 billion mark.
That's the surplus?
That's the amount that we are expected to have more than we actually expected or previously budgeted for.
8 billion.
Thank you.
And I'll put that in context. That's a lot. and I think it's one of the reasons why they're entertaining this idea of using dollars for transportation. They have so much money, they don't know how to spend it. And the transportation sector is one where they're going to get a lot of support from the stakeholders and shifting those dollars to infrastructure, because generally the business community supports that idea. But $8 billion is a lot, and so they're going to be looking for places to put it.
This is Carmen again. Are we looking at any more investments in our mental health in Western State, which impacts our criminal justice system?
That's a great question. I know that's an important issue. I don't follow that issue. Maybe there's someone else here on the call that can answer that question.
Senator Gildon.
I think that that's one of the issues that comes down to the budget negotiations as we decide priorities and allocate funds for the budget. So I think that's kind of yet to be determined, but always on the table. But really, I have no indication if it's got momentum or support at this time.
I'll add a couple things there. Some stuff has been funded already in the budget for building out kind of some transitional type beds that aren't at Western State. So that money is already in the budget, and then they're continuing to build and replace some outdated buildings at Western State. So all that's gone through the healthcare committee and being funded. So part of it is just time to build things out. So sorry for jumping in. Obviously, I got my coat on. I'm trying to run out the door, but good seeing everyone.
You too. Appreciate you being here. Is the AWB following much or doing much advocacy in the police reform sort of area?
The short answer is no. It's not an issue that we've typically engaged in. However, there are some elements of it that have brought us into those conversations. In particular, when it starts affecting business, we get a lot of calls during session, especially from chambers, about the police reforms and the homelessness issue also, about how it affects business. Simply it's preventing customers from entering businesses. It's preventing businesses from even opening sometimes. So we'll get pulled in when those requests are made, but generally it's not an issue that we engage on all that much.
Any other questions? I would probably go ahead and say, while we're talking about session, Senator Gildon, if you have other comments to add about any insight you're gleaning or committee work thus far, go ahead and chime in right now.
Yeah, no, I think Mike hit a lot of the highlights of session: the long-term care payroll tax, fixing the broken parts of the police reform bills, transportation funding. The format for session this year, I have every indication that the Senate is going to change rules today and going to go to more of a virtual hybrid type session. It's problematic for me because of just what Mike said earlier, is that a lot of those bills that passed probably wouldn't have passed had we had more public input. And some of the bills that needed reform today, they may have been better bills if we had people given input on campus. So I think that I did an interview with the Tacoma News Tribune yesterday, and that was one of the key points that I mentioned, is how important it is to have that public interaction with legislators to influence the legislative process. One of the things that we didn't talk about so far was emergency powers reform. There is some movement regarding emergency powers reform. I'm not sure what that's going to take or what that's going to exactly look like. but there will be some action I would expect in that arena. We had the leadership of the Senate Democrat caucus come out and say that, we need to do something. So that's encouraging. But I'm just not sure what that is. We're at 676 days of emergency rule right now. And I think we could all agree that our system of government was never meant to operate for such an extended period of time. And one of the comments that I get all the time from constituents is, Chris, why should I bother in the legislative process or the electoral process? Because does my vote really matter? We're just going to be under emergency rule. And I think that's one of the difficulties with this extended time of emergency rule, is that so many people have just kind of lost faith in the system, our democratic system of government. And it's going to take a little bit of time for us to rebuild that faith. And so I think certainly we've got to take action. Another topic that we didn't talk about that I think is going to come up this next session is insurance rates and credit scores. I think we've seen a lot of that over the past year with the insurance commissioner implementing an emergency rule and then getting slapped down a little bit, and but he's still trying to push forward with it. So I think this is something that if the people of Washington want to exclude using credit scores to set insurance rates, then I think that needs to be a decision that's made by the people's representatives, not by an agency rule. And so I think we'll take some action on that. And I think that was pretty much all of the big ticket items that I wanted to talk about. But regardless, I do want everybody to know that if I'm in Olympia or if I'm in Puyallup, I want to see people, I want to meet with people, and I want to be as open and as available as possible. So if the schedule at all allows, and you have an issue that you'd like to talk to me about, please do so, because I will make every single effort to make that happen.
And if I can add, we're currently assessing here at our office how we can engage more and how we can get our members to engage more with the legislature. And if you have, if you come to Olympia, and this goes to the legislature as well, so senators and representatives, if you need a space to meet, call us and you can meet here. We're just across the street from, or maybe 2 blocks down from the Capitol, and we have plenty of parking. We have plenty of office space. If you need to meet with Senator Gildon and you need a place to do it, you can do it here at our office. So feel free to make that request.
So to clarify, if there was a group that was traveling to Olympia, we might be able to round up legislators, and that's not against the rules per se, with a not in-person session.
Well, it depends on the changes they make, but I think generally you probably cannot have those meetings on the Hill.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, you'll probably have to go somewhere else to do it.
Perhaps the AWB office is what I'm also hearing.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yep.
I think we've just evolved what might be our hill climb a little bit.
Well, and we're struggling with trying to plan ours as well. It's all up in the air. It's changing. Even though the House has gone virtual, they say they're reassessing every 2 weeks. So we can't. It's hard to plan when the wind is blowing that fast.
Great. Are there any other questions from anyone on the call? Oh, Hannah Thomas. Hi. Good morning, Hannah.
Good morning. So a question for Michael, or perhaps anybody else to jump in. So when I hear what seems to be conflicting, saying that there are shortfalls in the budget, and yet when I read elsewhere, it says that there are budget surplus. In fact, it said for 2020, depending on what you read, that it was a windfall for the state budget. Then my question is, are these numbers that I'm hearing, are they based on projections or forecasts? Also, are they perhaps based on the master budget, or are they based on individual budgets for the different areas, whether you're talking about transportation, behavioral health, et cetera, et cetera? I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but hopefully you can help me understand, because it seems pretty conflicting depending on who you listen to or what you read.
Yeah, and I think the message has also changed pretty quickly over the last year and a half or so. What happened early on during the COVID response did cause budget shortfalls in the general fund and also in the transportation, well, especially in the transportation budget. And then since then, I think the economy has turned around to where it's creating budget surpluses. I think some of the confusion also rests with there are three different budgets in the state. There's the general fund, which is the operating budget. There's the transportation budget, and then there's the capital budget. Generally, we focus on the transportation and the general fund because they fluctuate the most. The general fund, as mentioned, has an $8 billion surplus. So the state is going to get $8 billion more than we thought we were going to get, and more than what's currently budgeted for. The transportation budget has been operating under a loss until recently, where it's now turned around and it's starting to get back on track to where it was before COVID. But it still created shortfalls with how do I explain that? With expenditures that have already been allocated. While revenue is now coming in as projected, while the revenues were down below what they were projected, it created shortfalls of some of these capital projects that were funded in the past. So while revenues look good at the moment, it did create holes in projects that have to be backfilled. Senator Gildon, maybe you want to explain that a little bit better than I did.
Yeah, no. So yeah, you did a good job. The operating budget is based off of a revenue forecast, and that forecast says we're going to have about $8 billion more than we expected or budgeted for last time. The transportation budget is based off of revenues collected from things like gas tax and stuff like that. That's where we're operating on, shoestring and bubblegum type of budget. We're barely making ends meet. As a matter of fact, the Gateway project right now, which includes the 167 completion project to complete 167 from where it dead ends, right there by Fred Meyer and Puyallup out by the Port of Tacoma. That right now has about a $250 million gap in funding that we've got to make up sometime either this session or the next session. We've got to find that money to keep it on timeline, because after next session, that project is scheduled to go out to bid. So if we want to keep that on the glide path to completion, then we've got to make up that budget gap right now. So that may be why you hear some of the things, we have a budget crisis or we have a budget surplus. It's the different budgets that we're talking about.
That makes sense. Sarah, did you have a question?
Yeah, is that what you're talking about moving funding in different places? Okay, that was my one. And then I had another one, which was, do we have any bills introduced so far for the change on the emergency powers or any police reform bills? Are there any numbers we should be following?
I can try to, there are some, and I'll try to drop some into the chat before the meeting's over. I'll have to look them up there, or at least I'll drop a link to all the pre-filed bills and you can peruse through them, but there's half a dozen bills.
Great. And Senator Gildon, you put out a newsletter quite frequently throughout session, correct?
I do. Typically I'll put out a email update 1 week and then a video update the next week. So if you want to stay abreast of what's going on in the legislative session, I would encourage you to not only subscribe to my updates, but also Rep. Chambers, Rep. Jacobson, Robertson, Stokesbury, whomever, because we're all on different committees. And so the information that we're putting out is kind of flavored by the committees that we serve on. So if you want to get a full picture of what's going on, subscribe to 2 or 3.
Yeah, and I try each week after our South Sound Chamber of Commerce Legislative Coalition updates provided by lobbyist Carolyn Lowe to just forward that to this group as well. And those are very detailed, with obviously giving you all opportunities to testify at any given time for specific bills as well. I'll mention, last year, Sarah, thank you, Sean Bunny, Kurt Jimistat, Luke Coram, and I all formed the legislative sort of session committee last year. I will certainly ask all of them if they'd like to participate again this year, and or anyone else that would like to join us. But again, just in the next week or so, get together. We have a general sense and a general priority sheet that we sort of follow based on the coalition's priorities, but this group helps needle down very specific bills. So as those pop up in the next couple of weeks, it's helpful when this group can help us highlight what we really need to make sure we get voices on, attention to. So, private chat me, send me an email, or raise your hand now if you'd like to participate. Thanks again, Sarah, on that committee, and I'll make sure to include you on whatever calendar holds we have for that in the upcoming couple of weeks. All right. Well, we also have, thank you so much, Mike Ennis. I so appreciate you being here. Sean, am I cutting you short? It sounds like Sean might have a question.
It was kind of ties into the session, but I was hoping to do a quick 60-second follow-up on the supply chain backlog conversation we had a couple weeks ago. There's a bit of a tie into session. I can wait a little bit or riff real quick for 60 seconds. It's up to you.
You can riff for 60 seconds. I still, I have a guest that has come on to talk about the employee retention credit. And then I was going to bounce to the county and city officials. So Sean, as the port, you kind of can go either way, whatever you'd like.
Let me just do 60 seconds real quick, just so, because since we've got Senator Gildon's attention here.
You got it.
There you go. So a couple weeks ago, I had an opportunity to brief this group on the supply chain backlog that we are seeing not only at the port, but throughout the supply chain. One of the things that we have been working on is developing an off-dock container yard down at the Port of Tacoma. It's a place where truckers would be able to have an ability to quickly enter and exit to be able to get empty containers, spare chassis. It also moves certain functions off of the terminals that don't have to be there, which just makes it quicker and easier to load and unload the ships. You may have seen an article right before Christmas in the News Tribune talking about how the port received a federal grant to assist with that project. We're very excited. There is a small gap still in funding. Fortunately, the governor in his proposed supplemental capital budget proposes spending about $2 million for this project. That sort of helps close the funding gap. And we are very hopeful that the chamber and in turn, our local Pierce County delegation will be able to be supportive of us on that. And I can talk in greater detail offline or later on about that. So thanks for the chance to riff for a few seconds.
Absolutely. Happy to pass along that information and garner whatever support you need. Absolutely. All right. So again, with the pandemic and with the different funding sources out there, has brought all kinds of other tidbits of information we need to kind of be tracking and be aware of. And so the employee retention credit is one of those that we'll be wanting to know more about, especially any employers that are on the line right now. So sort of fortuitously, I had some folks reach out to me yesterday, just really saying, hey, we want to share this information. Truly, that's what we want to do, is just disseminate as best we can so folks are informed and take advantage of as much as they can with the funds they received during the pandemic funding. So today we have Krista Calkins, who is the Sales and Marketing Operations Manager with Think LLP on the line to talk a little bit more about employee retention credit. So thanks for being here, Krista.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Tara. I know I'm kind of hopping in you guys' meeting. I'm hearing things about supply chain issues, and that's right on par with what the employee retention credit can help with. So I'll just kind of start at the beginning. This is a lot of information, but if you guys have any questions, we can definitely talk about it, or I'll drop my contact information into the chat and you can reach out more specifically. So I'll start with the fact that the employee retention credit came out of the CARES Act legislation back in 2020. We have seen 4 legislation changes in the last 2 years. So there's been a lot of changes about how you qualify, who qualifies, what the amount is that you qualify for. And because of that, we see a lot of confusion from businesses thinking that they may or may not qualify, especially if they looked into it when it first came out in 2020. The original ruling said that if you received a PPP loan, you were not eligible for the employee retention credit. Well, the majority of businesses did receive a PPP loan. In December 27th of 2020, a legislation change revoked that. So you can now receive a PPP loan and the employee retention credit. There are special rules about how you find the qualifying wages. You cannot double dip, but that's something that we can help you look into. There are two main ways to qualify for the employee retention credit. The first one is a revenue test, which again, the rules changed from 2020 to 2021. So in 2020, you're looking for any quarter compared to the same quarter in 2019, where you see a 50% revenue decline. But going into 2021, you're only looking for a 20% revenue decline. And again, that's comparing back to 2019. So Congress, basically IRS, determined that 2019 is the last year that business was as usual before the pandemic hit. So we're using 2019 as our base year, regardless of if we're looking at revenue in 2020 or 2021. An additional rule in 2021, which actually works out in most people's favor, is that you can use the previous quarter to qualify you for the existing quarter. So what I mean by that is, if you look at first quarter 2021 compared to first quarter 2019, and you don't see a 20% decline, you can actually look back to fourth quarter 2020 compared to fourth quarter 2019 to look for that 20% decline and qualify you for first quarter of 2021. That being said, if you're looking at first quarter 2021 and you do see a 20% decline, that qualifies you not only for first quarter 2021, but also second quarter of 2021, because you can use first quarter to qualify you for the second quarter. So there's that additional look back ruling and the change in the revenue decline that kind of slipped through most people's radar. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The second test is much more subjective. It's called the partial suspension test. And again, most of the time someone hears partial suspension and they think, I'm an essential business. We didn't shut down, business as usual. We switched over to remote. We were able to still maintain our operations. Partial suspension does not mean that your doors were closed. It means that you had to pivot and change the way that you did business because of governmental regulations. The IRS specifically mentions restrictions on commerce, group meetings, and travel. So if your business had to rely on travel for business development purposes and you were unable to travel or go to trade shows, that would be a potential qualifier. If you require group trainings or continuing education credits for your staff and you are unable to do that, that could be potentially qualify you. Some things we see in, restaurants are pretty obvious. If there was capacity restrictions or limited to takeout or drive-through only, that's a pretty obvious restriction that could qualify you. But if you look at something that's a more essential business, such as manufacturing or even senior living, where there are restrictions on visitation or restrictions on group activities, if dining had to be moved to individual rooms so there was less social interaction, and then families didn't feel as comfortable moving their loved ones into nursing facilities at that time because of the restrictions and the impact on the quality of life, again, that could be a potential restriction that would qualify you. What we're looking for is a quote unquote safe harbor where a minimum of 10% of your business was impacted by governmental orders. If you tell me that I opted to close my business or I opted to social distance my employees, we did that for their safety. That's great. What we're looking for is, was there a governmental order in place? Whether or not you chose to comply with it is between you and your staff, but if there was a governmental order in place, that's what we're looking for to tie that story together. What was the governmental order? How did it impact you? What did you do about it? And if we can draw a 10% impact to either your revenue or your employee work hours, then that would show a nominal impact. The other great thing about these tests, it's an either or situation. So you don't have to meet revenue and also have been suspended. You can also qualify under both, meaning if you meet the revenue test in 2021 and you meet the suspension test in 2020, we can qualify you for both time periods with whatever test makes sense at that time. That's the long and short of it. There's obviously a little bit more to it. If you, there were changes to who was considered a large employer or a small employer. So if you feel like you didn't qualify because you were over 100 employees or over 500 employees, again, that's a common misconception. You are still eligible. There's just changes to how we qualify, what wages we can apply that credit to. Again, I already covered if you received a PPP loan, even if it was forgiven, that's not a disqualifier. If you are government funded, but your focus is higher education or anything healthcare related, you do still qualify. So any of your county and city hospital districts, a lot of times we hear that they don't feel like they qualify. The answer is yes, you definitely can. So my suggestion to everyone is, even if you've looked into the employee retention credit, even if you had your CPA or your payroll company tell you that you did not qualify at any given time, it's definitely worth a second look. I would say that the majority of my clients that I've served over the last year, probably 70% of them felt that they were ineligible and had already looked into this before talking to us. And there's just so many changes and so many misconceptions that it's worth a second look just to make sure you're not leaving a lot of money on the table. Speaking of money, the amount is up to $26,000 per eligible employee. So that's definitely a lot of money to be looking at. So I know that was a lot of information in a short amount of time. Does anyone have any questions?
Just switched my view real quick so I could scan the room. That is a lot of information. And my question was going to be, what does that credit look like if it was flat rates based on wages or whatnot? But up to $26,000 is significant.
It is significant. And the way that breaks down is what we're looking at is trying to find $10,000 in qualifying wages per employee in 2020 and $10,000 in qualifying wages per quarter per employee in 2021. And in 2020, you can claim up to 50% of that, so up to $5,000 per employee. In 2021, you can claim 70% of those wages, so up to $7,000 per quarter. So let's say that you have employees that make less than $40,000 a year, then obviously they're not making $10,000 in a quarter. That's okay. Whatever their qualified wages are for that quarter, we'll be looking at 70% of that number. So it's not an all or nothing credit. You can definitely take a partial credit based on what we can find that's eligible. It's also not based on your payroll taxes. So again, if you're a nonprofit and you're not paying payroll taxes, it's based on the wages that you're paying. It's not a loan. You don't have to pay it back. There's no restrictions on how you utilize the money. It is a tax refund. Once you file an amended 941 to receive that credit, we're just waiting on the IRS at this point to send the check, which can take 4 to 6 months right now. They're just as backed up as everybody else. But that's definitely what you're looking at. It looks like Ryan has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Krista. That's some fantastic information. Is there a website that we can send our business owners to check this out?
Absolutely. What I'll do is send, I'll put a link in the chat. Our business website, our firm's website is thinkllp.com. We have several resources on our website, including if there's a 30-minute webinar people could watch, a couple YouTube videos that explain some of the nuances, and then of course our brochure that goes into more questions that you can ask yourself around partial suspension, just to kind of get that conversation going, maybe with your operations department. So yeah, I'll drop that into the chat. And then besides that, there's just so many resources online. I would just make sure that if you come across something and you think that it's confusing or you think you might not qualify, keep digging, because there's been so many changes over the last few months. If it's outdated information, there may be something that changed.
Terrific. Well, we'll obviously be sure to gather that information for our chamber chatter and to put as resources on our website. But gosh, that was a lot of information, and you did such a thorough and clear way of communicating it. So I appreciate you doing that. Yeah, please do put your contact information and website in our chat as we move through our city and county officials. If there's any other questions you have for Krista at any point in time, anyone, go ahead and feel free to chime in. But for now, I just want to thank you so much for being here at such last minute notice.
All right, thank you so much.
You bet. All right, so let's see. I know we have County Council Member Zeiger on the phone. Hello. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Good morning, Tara and everybody. A couple of things just quickly. We have gone through county council redistricting, and that has taken effect. So my council district has changed considerably, but still includes the Puyallup Sumner area. There was one version of actually a proposal that ended up being amended to put Sumner back into the district. So the district has Puyallup, South Hill. I added a lot of South Hill actually, Summit View, Sumner, Edgewood, Milton, and Pacific. So we lost 5 Northeast Tacoma, Dash Point, Browns Point, the Tide Flats, and we lost Alderton, McMillan. So I wanted to talk just quickly about the county's legislative agenda, and to the extent that it dovetails with things that the chamber is interested in, or other groups, some of the cities represented on here are interested in during the legislative session, would be very interested in collaborating. And so please don't hesitate to reach out to me as you're putting together your own legislative agendas. Just a few things in our agenda. Canyon Road remains a very high priority for the county. It is the #1 road project, and we are hoping that the state can come through with $50 million for that project. So any discussion that happens about a transportation package, we are very eager to include that $50 million, have that included in there, and anything we can do to keep that a priority in the legislature. It's been included in previous proposals out of the Senate, but want to make sure that stays in the conversation. Secondly, the county is supportive of revisions to policing reforms. And so there is language in our county legislative agenda about that. And then we have a whole set of priorities when it comes to economic development and fiscal sustainability that includes broadband investment in counties, small business and micro enterprise recovery, skill building, support legislation that increases opportunities to reskill, upskill, and respond to changing workforce needs in the economy. And then there's one on regulatory reform, supporting legislation to identify tax and regulatory burdens on the small business community, affecting such factors as insurance, labor, and rent, and make recommendations to repeal, suspend, or revise those that are unduly burdensome. So a lot more that is in the county legislative agenda, but those are some that I thought would be of interest to this group. And I hope you all have a great month.
Any questions for Senator? Excuse me, Councilmember Zeiger.
I had a question, if I could, Tara. Yeah. Councilmember Zeiger, how much funding are you going to be requesting for Canyon Road, or what do you?
$50 million.
Okay.
Yeah. So that has been what it was included in a couple of previous versions of the Senate transportation package that were proposed by Senator Hobbs. And so hoping that we can have that same amount in any future transportation proposals.
And I'm not sure how well we communicated our advocacy on wanting to see Puyallup and Sumner stay together in the districts, but we did weigh in. Of course, Puyallup Sumner Chamber of Commerce. All right. Well, again, great to see you and appreciate the updates. Have a great year, great successful year on County Council, and let us know when we need to be wherever we need to be. All right, let's move to some of our cities. Let's first give a nice big warm welcome to newly appointed Mayor Kathy Hayden from City of Sumner. Was happy to be at her, I was going to say inauguration. What is it? I'm not using the right terminology, but I was happy to be there to see you get your crown.
Thank you. I'm excited. Got our first meeting under my belt last night. So the first meeting of the year is always complicated, picking committees and all kinds of things, but I'm ready to go, and here we are.
Do you want to talk a little bit about who the new city council members are?
We have Pat Cole, who actually did the chamber debate, and Earl Stewart are our two men. Earl is a returning council member. He was on a few years ago. So we're happy to have both of them back, or both of them here anyway.
Yeah, I'll get them on our invites for calendar holds for GAC, and hopefully they can pop in with some updates from time to time. Yeah, really excited about both of them.
And you're right, the chamber Christmas party was a hoot. It was so fun. Enjoyed it.
It is. It's a great way to end the year, and I love seeing the two communities come together. And boy, I got to be on the Polar Express train. My dream come true, Miss Hallmark over here.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So, so Ryan, what kinds of things are happening in development and community?
We've got plenty going on, but I kind of wanted to just touch base on the legislative agenda, kind of keeping with the theme of this meeting, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
We are trying to keep our requests short because we feel like that's the best way to approach it. And we're focusing on transportation. So we are asking for $7 million for the Stewart Road Bridge construction. This is a project we've talked about for 20 years. And if we don't move forward by 2024, we're in danger of losing $9 million towards a $30 million project. So we're hoping to close that gap and move forward. Also, what we hope is a fairly easy request to move $500,000 in funding from the Traffic Avenue 410 interchange project that is now completed. We'd like to move that funding over to our next big headache, which is at the 166th and 410 interchange. So, and just generally speaking, looking for more money for the SR 410 166 interchange project, and supportive of any funding that would help us with our headaches on SR 167, particularly the southbound third lane project, any package in that regard. So those are kind of our priorities. And then we have our White River Restoration Project that as looking for support there, not necessarily a specific funding ask, but support there. And then ongoing support for local planning. And that's, so anyhow, those are our legislative agenda. And just real quick on some current projects in Sumner that I know folks are I'm always giving updates on. The Red Apple Market project, which is now called the Kincaid Apartments, is a mixed use project. They're planning on getting permits in Q1, and then hopefully by Q4 breaking ground in 2022. They dug a massive hole for remediation of some of the soil contamination and so they actually already, I guess, technically broke ground. If you drive by there, it's a giant hole. And then I don't know who all has heard about our 7-Eleven project on the corner of Main and Valley. We had a notice of application go out last month. Well, actually in November was the deadline for comment. We had 40 comments, and we have a neighborhood group that is pretty active and very concerned about a gas station being located in that location. We haven't scheduled a public hearing for that yet, but there will be a public hearing in front of our hearing examiner coming up for that one. And then last thing I wanted to put a mention in is that the council did adopt our Main Street visioning plan that we had worked with UW Tacoma on for that. And we are moving forward with design and construction of it's called a Woonerf design around Heritage Park. Real excited about that. And that will create more of a plaza type effect around the park. And so we're moving forward on that. And just want to keep it short as I can here.
That's exciting. Very cool. Great. Any questions for Ryan? All right, I know we're a bit over, but let's roll to City of Puyallup here to round us out. Councilmember Johnston, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Tara. Appreciate it. Just listening to some of the things that were mentioned today, speaking from my perspective only, it can be very discouraging, quite frankly, when you look at some of the windows into the future, what's taken place recently and what's going on. It can be very discouraging. And so as I look at that, I'm very an optimistic person. So to be experiencing that is, I think, very telling for me. However, that being said, I don't give up hope. I think there's always hope in the midst of discouraging situations. I think one of the natural hope things that we have to remember is that there's this thing called positive peer pressure via elections, and those policies that didn't pan out very well. It's a time for voters who may have seen certain candidates in certain lights now realizing that their good intention bills have not produced good intentions, but perhaps negative. It's an opportunity to straighten out and correct that through some proper voting coming up this year. So there's hope in that. Also, I think there's a lot of good intention policymakers who, again, given the benefit of the doubt, they felt this was the right thing to do, and they believe they're doing the right thing. And unfortunately, perhaps not. And so I think there needs to be, in my opinion, a great awakening. That minds are opened, ears are open, hearts are open to be able to make some changes. And that includes myself. I don't claim to know it all or see it all. And maybe there's some adjustments I need to make. And so I'm looking inward and saying, what does Dean Johnson need to be awakened to be a better public servant, right? And so I think it goes across the board. It's not us and them, but all of us being honest and saying, what awakenings do I need to be a better public servant? So I'm hoping for some great awakenings to take place in the lives of people so that our country can awaken to some better places. We certainly need that. And so for Puyallup, we're hoping for a couple of things. One is we're looking forward to some massive economic development. We want to stimulate business in a way that's going to counter so many industries who have suffered. The seems like the disbursement of funds has done very well for certain industries, but very, very hard for others. So what can we do to generate and stimulate economic development in a way that will be able to put some money back in some pockets of families and strengthen that? We want to work on home ownership. And so in Puyallup, the ratio of home ownership versus rentals is awfully close. If I recall right, it's somewhere around 48% of our housing is rentals and only 52 home ownership. I believe that's a problem. It's too tight of a gap. So what can we do to encourage affordable housing that people can buy and build family wealth and equity? So we want to talk about hitting that head on. And maybe that means some micro condos or some creative shared wall housing, but something that would allow entry level homes, maybe a first time home buyer, things along those lines to work on it. So we want to hit that real hard and stimulate that. But we're looking forward to a great couple of years. And Lord willing, we're hoping to be able to make a difference here in our town as well.
Well said. Well said indeed. I also see Katie Baker. Katie, if you have any updates from the city, I would love to hear from you as well. Thanks for joining us. Pinch hitting for Meredith, I suppose.
Meredith and Jeff Wilson.
Great.
So I'm Katie Baker. I'm in our Development Services Department. Sitting in for Jeff Wilson today, and don't have a lot to add, but just appreciate the update on the legislative session and what's coming up in Puyallup. I think probably most of you are aware, I'm sure Jeff has announced it, that we launched our new permit software in December. And so we've had a few bumps starting off as is expected, but it's going well, I think. And we're very excited for all of the efficiencies that will bring us and process improvements that we'll be working on the first part of this year. And then we're also just excited about some of the development projects we're seeing. What we call the AOB project, which is an apartment project, is continuing to move forward. So that's just west of the library. And a few other kind of smaller apartment projects downtown. So as Councilmember Johnson was saying, we're very excited for the economic development that will spur in our downtown area. So I'll leave it there for now. Thanks for letting me join in.
Absolutely. Great. Any questions as we close here? Well, again, thank you all for being here. We will see you in February. And just again, have a safe, happy, healthy New Year to everyone.